Good morning. Welcome to our study session. We're very pleased to have you here. Ruth, if you'll call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Adamson?
Here.
Gray?
Here.
Cheatham?
Here.
Lurick?
Here.
Manon?
Here.
Johnston?
Here.
Platt?
Okay, let's go ahead and begin with the animal shelter, please. Well, that does not look good.
No, we don't have any left.
Okay. Well, then let's go to Bannock Development, please. John, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council. I appreciate you giving us a few minutes to update you on some of the new developments since the last time we met 3 months ago. And let's see, some of you were at our investor breakfast here 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, I should say. So I'll try not to cover too much of the same material here. This looks like the same slide, but we've just highlighted the trade shows and conferences that we've been to in the last quarter. And the first quarter of the year is always our busiest. We cover most of our conferences and trade shows. And so the SHOT Show we do with Idaho Commerce, and that is geared towards basically approaching companies like optics manufacturers that make rifle scopes, binoculars, ammunition manufacturers, firearms manufacturers. And we pursue these specifically because they translate into advanced manufacturing jobs. And these are manufacturing positions that typically use equipment that's computer controlled, and so good paying positions. And so they're very highly sought after. Well, actually, one announcement that we kind of got there is that one of the rifle manufacturers, one of the premier ones, Weatherby, actually had just decided to locate in Wyoming. And to tell you how competitive this market is, they were given a building. I would assume it's like a rent-free facility for 5 years or more. That's the second time that's happened to me with a firearms manufacturer from that show that was looking at expanding. And so pretty tough competition, and you have to really be willing to compete to answer those kinds of challenges and that kind of competition.
What city in Wyoming do you have? Do you know?
Sheridan. Sheridan. Yeah, I think they're building a new building. It looked like an artist rendition. About 100 jobs. Like I say, premier company, very solid. And actually, I think we were the finalist for Idaho because we had a building, and we were willing to work on remodeling it to upgrade it. But,
what else did they do that attracted them?
Pardon?
What else did Wyoming do that turned the tide for them?
I think what everybody has is they have the training that's available, and they have the workforce, and they have a background. We have a pretty solid background in steel fabrication and machining, and so that probably makes us attractive. But we had buildings in the Naval Ordnance Plant. And so, a new building is obviously going to be pretty competitive with contemporary manufacturing. They may not have needed the high ceilings as well, but we were more than willing to talk with them and look at remodeling one of those facilities if we had the opportunity. So, but just a very, very competitive field. Site Selectors Guild, leading site selectors throughout the country. We did that here about a week and a half ago. Actually, I just got back from that when we did the investor breakfast. But the Site Selector Guild is an opportunity to interact with the folks that do the majority of the big projects in the nation. And a lot of companies contact us directly, and we've had some interaction with those in the last quarter as well. But we've distributed some information about Northgate, as well as some of our available buildings, like the Farms Building and the old Farm Bureau Building, which used to be continuing education, as well as the 151 building. All of these are, high-tech, plug-and-play type of office buildings that national-type companies may be looking at if they're looking at a regional office. So I had a chance to get involved with those folks and interact with them. The Computer and Electronics Government Conference. This was specifically a conference that we went to because it was executive level attendees there. So all the people that we would have encountered there were executives, presidents, CEOs, and director level type people. And that's why we attended. We were clued into that, and we were accompanied by Buchanan and Edwards. And so that actually gave us some really good contacts as well.
Do you want to explain Buchanan and Edwards to the people, those of us here know, but...
Yeah, Buchanan and Edwards is a high-volume data security and processing type company. They also work with the HR development part of that industry, and they have located, they actually have located, they're growing in Pocatello, and they are one of the contractors with the FBI. And so they expand. There'll be a slide later. But anyways, it's always a good relationship to have with one of our companies where we can attend a trade show and have somebody that can make a warm introduction for us.
Good.
Silicon Slopes was another trade show that was actually held in Salt Lake City and was comprised of high-tech companies that are growing in the greater Salt Lake City area, and so we attended that. Again, featured a lot of the CEOs of these companies that we could try to interact with and make contact with and develop relationships with. Now, the Select USA is a trade show we're going to be attending in June. That's why it's not fully highlighted. And that will be attending that in conjunction with Commerce and Ready and CEDU and Idaho Power, as well as NAMPA. So it's a statewide effort. We initially got involved by collaborating with Ready on this particular trade conference. And so that is for companies that are looking, foreign companies that are looking at setting up shop in the United States. And so we've had some leads that have come from that, and we continue to network and support these other agencies and collaborate with them. I mentioned Live Exchange. We did that last year. That was one of our trade shows that one of our lead prospects has come from here at this point. So anyways, some of the results this quarter, or this year so far, we've had 2 site visits from a couple of companies, and we've had 1 more scheduled. So looking to basically respond to about 42 direct leads, indirect, and as well as through Commerce and Ready. So we hope to get to that number again, 42 for last year. So, and that's pretty well in line with what we did in the previous year, 2016.
I would make this comment, John, having now served on the board for Bannock Development and participated in one of those site visits. You and your staff really do a great job in having materials for them and spot on in terms of what these people need to know relative to our community. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that very much. Some of the other marketing that we do, direct marketing, what we've done is we're targeting companies that really fit our economy and fit our resources, that we have an advantage to supporting, and going out and directly contacting them, and then we'll do some more follow-up with them as we proceed with some of our interns and with some of our board members. And you see the targets that we've identified there that we have some strong support systems for. Retention and expansion. First item of business is always supporting our local companies and helping them grow and address any issues that they might have. And of course, one of the items we always look for is, beyond expansions, is do they have any suppliers or maybe customers that could locate here. I mentioned Northgate. We're working with them on identifying markets that they'd like to jointly market to, but we're also helping them with talent development that they will need for construction of their project, as well as assisting companies that might want to locate there. We've increased the number of committees with our board. There's by about 5, and so there's 8 committees that we have that our board members volunteer for, but other members of the community that we can identify, or folks that are interested in helping out, can participate in those committees as well. And then we do sites and buildings inventory, of course, but that includes the whole county. We even have sites in South County that have some potential for us, as well as doing project assistance. We assist projects here, obviously in the Pocatello Chubbuck community, but also throughout the county. We just got done working for a study in McCammon. Just to try to bring you some new information on the FBI project, those 500 total new jobs that we're going to have there due to this expansion process, that's going to result in 160 spin-off jobs. And the total wages of both the new jobs and the spin-off jobs should create $65 million of economic impact annually. And this study was done by the Department of Labor's regional economist. So wasn't me doing hillbilly math trying to come up with the numbers. It was actually somebody credible that did the figures. So
You're credible, John.
So
You're
we think.
disrespecting hillbillies.
So this has obviously been one of our driving forces, because this project actually has been going on for about 2 years, starting with the administrative and some of the services areas growing for the FBI. The construction expansion is actually going to create about 1,700 jobs. Now, they're not going to be there for the whole time, the construction, but the impact from those wages and the investment in materials should generate about $158 million of economic impact to the area in southeast Idaho.
Where are these people going to come from?
They come through with the contractors that do the construction. They're national. The main contractor is a national company, and that's the kind of contractors that do the general contracting for federal projects like this. But they then hire local companies and regional construction companies to actually complete the project.
So we may need to have some housing concerns for that many people? Or will these people bring their own?
Some of them actually will bring their own. Some of them will stay in the temporary housing in the region. Like I said, they won't be here the whole time, so you won't have 1,700 people in the community. You could have like 300 to 500 at once, that are working on various phases of the project.
Great. Thank you.
And some of them could be, and some of them will be local companies, so they'll already be domiciled here. But your point's well taken. The good problem that we have with this kind of growth is that we need more housing, which generates more construction jobs. But as I mentioned, the mall area, we think the dining area has developed because of this project. Another one of our big projects on Semiconductor, they've had $100 million of investment in the last 7 years, but and that's generated 750 jobs and growing. The good news is they're going to invest another $78 million in the next 3 years. And that's in measure in large part because of the support this community has shown them, specifically through the county commission and extending tax exemptions to them to help them invest this new technology. The new technology is what keeps this kind of a company competitive. They have 69 sites throughout the globe, and they all compete for projects within the company itself, not to mention outside.
So, $100 million in investment, 78 the next 3 years. How many new jobs does that create in the community?
I think they had 90 jobs advertised in this
Are those
past year.
replacing people retiring, or are those new jobs?
I think some of those are going to be retirement, but I think a lot of them were focusing on new positions that they had coming up to work in these, to work with this new equipment. I would say at least 60% of them are going to be new jobs. How do I say this? Some of the more technical positions, some of the more technical, less physical areas have a little less attrition rate with retirement, but they do face that. They do face the solar tsunami.
Excuse me, just to clarify, so the investment's within the company, right?
that you have listed, like the 78 million in the next 2 years, 100 million for the last
will-
7. Are they investing within the company themselves, like new technology?
It'll be new equipment
equipment
with
for the-
higher technology, right. New fabrication tools for expanded production capacity. Part of that $100 million is they actually rebuilt the fabrication facility by putting new equipment in there.
Thank you.
Does some of this equipment with like automation and that, does it depreciate pretty fast as personal property?
Some of it does. Some of the more computerized type equipment does. Some of the fabrication equipment takes a little longer. You might look at more of a 10-year amortization on that, whereas computer type equipment that runs on computer chips, that can depreciate in 5 years because the technology just
So
advances.
some of this investment, if we give tax incentives, it kind of depreciates and goes away by the time we're really getting to tax it.
Some does, some doesn't. They actually, and this is the personal property end of it,
Yeah.
they actually do not request anything on the real property. Zipkit Mobile Homes, we announced them about a year ago, but they've actually located in another building on Garrett Way, and so they've got settled in and they have their final manufacturing site, and that's 40 jobs, again, in the construction market. Buchanan and Edwards, which we touched on previously, their project actually increased. They were going to have 20 jobs to 50 jobs, but once they took a look at the opportunities that they have here, they increased the size of that project to 80 jobs. And these are positions that pay $80,000 to $110,000 a year. Very highly skilled, highly trained, and qualified people. They all have to have security clearances.
Where are they located? I guess I don't even know where
They have a
they're.
small office up in the building. I'm in the Business and Technology Center. But as they grow, they're going to need some more office space. The people they're putting in right now actually work on the site,
I see.
work on the FBI site. So, but they will need some space at some point. They've actually developed a partnership with Idaho State University for talent development with the Information Integrity Department as well as the Computer Sciences Department. Great Western Malting, just an update on that. In addition to the 10 jobs that were created there, the Department of Labor computes 59 spin-off jobs as part of the economic impact. And so when we add up all the salaries from that, we look at about $2.4 million of annual economic impact from the salaries there. That doesn't include building services, restaurants, or the trucking jobs that are created. And
What kind of spin-off jobs would they create if you're not including trucking?
I would say probably they're going to be folks that are working on equipment, maybe doing some of the repair work, some of the maintenance work, programming work on that. Labor didn't identify that specifically. These are done with equations and logarithms that use other models, and over time have developed standards for the spin-off jobs. The reason we have a lot of these spin-off jobs is because every step of value added that is involved with this project is located here. So we realize all of the benefits. It starts with growing the crops all the way through to finally selling them to the final user, which would be a brewery, a brewing facility. We also have been working with the Your Future in Technology program, and that's kind of taken a little turn in how we approach that this year. That will be working on training the career advisors so that they can continually get the message out to the students that they are encountering about high-tech, high-demand, high-wage jobs that are available right now, and also the training with the College of Technology or the high school that's also available right now. So a year or two out of graduation, these students can walk into positions that are paying $35,000 all the way up to $90,000 a year. And like I said, currently, these jobs are looking for people, and so we just want to help them get involved. These are some of the leading prospects that we've got right now. We alluded to some of them. We have a high-tech manufacturer that's going to be incubating in Pocatello, and we'll be coming up with an announcement here soon on that. And we've gotten some assistance from the PDA, and they're looking at generating 10 jobs in the $30,000 to $50,000 a year range, and that's probably to go with another 20 jobs that they already have in the area. Construction manufacturer, this is one of the, I think this is the site visit that Councilman Johnston referred to, and that's potentially 100 jobs at $20 plus an hour. And so we're really excited about that potential. We have a warehouse company that would like to create 60 jobs, and we anticipate that'll be market about $15 an hour. And then a firearms and ammunition manufacturer that we met at the SHOT Show that's very interested in coming here. As a sole proprietorship, privately owned company, they have some family business to address before that they can actually make the move. Very interested. Met with the governor in the Department of Commerce at the trade show, and so they're very impressed. And then we also have a data center, and they are looking for some facilities, and that's going to be the site visit that's coming up. Have to determine all the particulars on that as well. So results we talked about before, it's going to be revenue to the community through various levels with people's jobs, with their investments, with their companies, and also to the local taxing entities, and increases in wages, which we've seen in the past, and developing talent. We had the state's leading workforce development program for the past 2 years, and we hope to continue that. So that proven track record yields results, and we think well worth our investment in time and in dollars.
So when you had that increase in wages at $4,800, is that annualized over 3 years, or?
That was just the increase. That was the increase from 13 to 15. So
Okay.
I think we're at $18 and something average annual wage, and 13 it was $22 by 15.
Okay.
We were actually recognized by the U.S. Bureau of Labor, and a study that had picked up on those numbers as being one of the top emerging economies for small cities in the United States.
Well, and Idaho was supposed to have led the nation in wage increase, but when you're down at so low, it doesn't take too much to lead by percentage.
Yeah,
10% increase at $10 versus a 10% increase at $30 is a big difference. So,
Yeah, we currently do lead the nation, Idaho does, in the percentage of jobs created and wages, wage levels.
John, you mentioned opportunities for volunteers. I had someone ask me the other day how they might get involved and how they might help. And so tell me, is there a person or a website or a source that I can send them to that, if they wanted to get in touch with some of these committees, or?
I can give you my card and you can just shoot me an email.
Okay, so directly to you would be the best way for them. Okay.
You have to kind of watch these guys. I left a meeting early and became chairman of one of those 8 committees.
Yes, they should tell me if they're interested in leadership positions.
And they don't have to be a board member, you said. It can just be
Right.
someone.
We look for, we don't just have board members that are volunteers. We're working, like with the millennial folks, we have a couple of board members on there, but a lot of the industry experts or industry representatives are involved as well. So somebody that has a specific skill or from a specific industry that we can engage.
Okay.
And we can try
So
to
if
do
someone
that.
had some marketing experience, is a committee the best place for them, or is there some other role that they could?
We have a
help you
PR
with?
committee, or we can just figure out if there's a way they could help us out.
Okay.
With some contacts or insight into an industry.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I would just point out, I gave everybody a couple examples of protocols that other places use to rank and rate businesses come in. and tax incentives. I really think it'd be helpful for us with tax increment financing and other things to be able to score and hold the companies accountable to the performance they projected versus the performance they're realizing. And these metrics, you're going to pick and choose. There's several others out there, but these were simple ones to just provide an example with.
You gave John a copy of that also?
John's got a
Good.
copy. Everybody
It
here
looks
got-
very thorough, Roger. Thank you.
Yeah, so, well, there's several out there. And one of the things I would continue to mention is, as I read about development and tax incentives, a lot of places are really evaluating big companies versus smaller companies. They're finding that they leverage much more when they incentivize smaller companies. The 5 to 20 employee company that needs a little boost gets going. So just keep that in the hopper too.
One of the limiting factors we seem to have in this community is a lack of labor. We just don't have anybody to go to work. Are any of Bannock Development's efforts designed to bring that talent to the community?
Yeah, I mean, that's the Your Future and Technology program specifically geared towards that. And so what it does is try to get those high school students into those technical programs to fill those technical positions. With high-tech companies or high-tech positions like Buchanan and Edwards and the FBI are looking for the initial ramp-up, they are going to have to recruit those experts, for the most part, from the outside. But those partnerships, we introduce them to the computer sciences and information integrity departments. For an ongoing pipeline, on an ongoing basis, we try to plug them in to the university or the technical college, or even our union's training programs, so that they have a continued pipeline. That's really what they're going to look for when they need that resource, because they know they're going to have to recruit people from outside to come into the community to start up for ramp up, in addition to local talent.
But even beyond technical jobs, there's a real lack in our community right now of pipe fitters and welders and carpenters and plumbers and all those trade skills to meet the construction demand we have going on. Is there any answer for that?
Yeah, we do call those technical positions, so we kind of rely on the College of Technology to help us interface, as well as working with the unions to try to get their people involved.
Have you seen success with those programs? I mean, is that helping this issue? Or?
With the ERFIC program, I know we sent 4 people to the lineman school in Boise. And so there's about a half a dozen other students that we've been able to track that have gone to the College of Technology to actually engage in the programs. It's kind of hard to track them, because when a student enrolls, that isn't necessarily one of the standard questions on the application: did you participate in the ERFIC program? But they're trying to gauge that more. But their programs are full, and their placement is almost 100%. So I think part of our challenge right now that we work with, and we are engaged in trying to get this accomplished, is expanding the College of Technology's capacity, which usually means another instructor.
You said their placement is almost 100%. Are a lot of them going elsewhere?
Yes.
Is that part of the problem?
Yep.
We're not keeping
Well, some of
them?
them are. Most of them would prefer to stay here. If there's a position here that they can acquire, then they'll stay here. So we'll see more of that percentage shifting to local positions.
Yesterday, the mayor and I had the opportunity to attend a meeting where there was quite a discussion of the College of Technology, and Dean Scott Rasmussen presented some information in terms of what's happening in the Eames building and the great renovations that are taking place there to accommodate the need for educational facility for these technology-oriented people. So I think the university is really working hard to try and meet this great demand that we have right now.
The programs, when they introduce a program, the State Board of Education has to approve these, and so once they approve them, it's an interesting process. You have the idea, you go to a board, you ask for it, eventually they approve it or they don't, and then the next year they budget for it, and so then the next year after that, so it's like a 3-year process to add an instructor to do this. And so this problem that we have in Pocatello with a lack of people and employees really truly is a statewide issue, because throughout the state they have the same problem, but the process, nobody has addressed the process of making this move faster and using the resources that we have. And one thing John's done very well is working with the high schools and Dean Rasmussen in trying to get the high schools to be able to teach some of this as well, so that they're already prepared and moving forward. So it's not a 2-year process, it's a 1-year process to get them through school. And John's also worked with the companies to get these people employed here. And a lot of them do stay in our area, but there are some that go. So,
is there any opportunity to recruit outside Idaho, outside Pocatello, to bring people here with those skills already in place?
On the technical end of things, some. There may be some more opportunity to try to approach people that have, maybe some higher skills, but yeah, I think there is. We just need to get some consensus on how we pull that together and make that happen. And because there's places like the Silicon Valley or even, the West Coast, period. The cost of living is so high that even the companies are starting to get squeezed between how much they have to pay their people so that they can live and still be able to make a profit and still be able to survive. It's just, so we just have to figure out how we can make a partnership on that and do some marketing. And there's no guarantee that the marketing generates people relocating.
But one of your struggles is that comparatively our wages are still fairly low. You go through training here at ISU and you can start here at X dollars, but you can start someplace else at $5 an hour or more. And you move 400, 600 miles. A classic example is the teachers. Used to be that there was a surplus of teachers in Pocatello. Now the school district's having to employ non-credentialed teachers because there's been such an outflow to all the other states that are paying much higher salaries. And, when you could move to Wyoming, I don't know if it's still true, but a few years ago, you could move to Wyoming and realize $20,000 to $30,000 if you were an experienced teacher, or superintendent, $40,000. People just chose to do that. They said, I like Idaho, but I can come back and visit Idaho with what I'm getting paid somewhere else. Yeah, and that's been a big problem. That's something that you can't solve.
Yeah, that's definitely an industry issue, and the wages are increasing because they can't find the things, and so they have to pay a little bit more, but it's probably still not enough.
What was it, $100 million went into education this year, and much of it is geared towards teacher salaries. So
Yeah.
I think we're headed in the right direction, but it's just slow.
It's a slower process. I like what you said, though, Rick. We need to maybe get a marketing plan. We've looked at the younger generation, and as they've been moving up through high school and stuff, and maybe that program's going good. Maybe we need to start getting a program to bring people in more and figure out what we need to do that.
Well, there are other parts of the country that have much higher unemployment rates. And
There'd be an
I know
incentive.
that there are, talking to people I know within the community, there are opportunities everywhere from a mechanic's assistant at an automobile dealership. I've got a friend who runs a glass shop. He's begging for help, paying $18 to $20 an hour to train somebody to install glass and can't get an applicant. There's just huge opportunities in our community right now, and there's got to be a way to bring those people in, but I don't know what it is.
We need to figure that out. That's something we ought to be looking for and doing.
Thank you.
We'll do some more research on that.
Super.
I also want to add on the same note about the need of jobs. I think there's a big need for technology jobs too. There are a lot of people that I know in the community that are looking for qualified software engineers and consultants and of that nature, but yet, there's nobody here. So I think that's something else, so we can work with ISU to kind of focus on that and drive that out more into our, into our community.
Yeah, software engineering might be something that they could augment or maybe develop more offerings for.
That was great. Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
We'll move on to agenda item 4. By the way, thank you for getting this meeting started. We had a meeting in finance that we needed to get, and if your CFO is not happy, you're not happy. So I don't think I made her happy, though.
Do we need to call the animal shelter? They weren't here.
Why don't we go ahead and get started on this, and I'll have somebody, I'll run back real quick and see if they can't do that. We'll move to agenda item number 4, proposed ordinance prohibiting feeding of wildlife within the city limits. Urban Wildlife Task Force representatives will be present to discuss a proposed ordinance to begin addressing human-wildlife problems within city limits. Representatives feel the proposed ordinance will benefit both humans and wildlife. So who's up?
We're up.
Who's were? There, I see one of you up. There you go. We got 2 of you now. Is there any more?
That's it.
All right.
My name is Steve Walling.
Moral support behind you in the works?
Yes, we have moral support. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present our idea to you. My name is Steve Walling. I live at 5002 Elizabeth, and I work for the city in the building department. I'm a member of the Urban Wildlife Task Force. We are a committee of 12 people that have volunteered their time from the local community, put together with the help of the Idaho Fish and Game, to address problems with wildlife that were brought up in a community meeting in May of 2017. That meeting was to address problems with deer in the Johnny Creek area. There were around 100 people that attended that meeting. The committee is comprised of people that attended that meeting from all sides of the issue. We all love seeing animals, but we all agree there is a growing problem. We are not against wildlife. We are looking for ways wildlife and humans can coexist. At the meeting, it was brought up that there are areas where deer and other wildlife are creating a hazard to both themselves and humans. There's also beginning to be problems with wild turkeys and existing problems with waterfowl. One of the main problems is that the wildlife are becoming too comfortable in their surroundings in their urban environments. The Fish and Game have been getting many calls about people feeding animals in their yards. That is what brings us here today. We need your help. Although this is just the first step, we, as a group, feel strongly that an ordinance against feeding of wildlife within the Pocatello city limits is vital to helping solve this problem. Feeding of wildlife other than songbirds and squirrels is not healthy for the animals involved. Deer, wild turkeys, wild ducks and geese are not pets. They are wild animals. Feeding is not necessary. Feeding congregates them into small areas where they cause property damage, can spread disease among each other and to humans. They attract predators. They cross roads, making them vulnerable to collisions with autos and death to animals and possibly humans. For every one animal hit, there must be countless near misses. In 2017, there were 137 reported deer killed on the roads in Bannock County. A majority of them were in the Bannock Highway, Johnny Creek, Gibson Jack areas, and the South 5th I-15 corridor. The committee will continue to work on other ways to eliminate wildlife problems, but we ask you to please consider this ordinance to help us start addressing the problem. The Idaho Department of Fish and Game has helped us put together educational materials to give to the general public. I'd like to introduce Zach Locklear, Regional Wildlife Biologist for the Fish and Game. He will now show you what we have to offer.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank all of you for the time today. I put together a presentation that I'll go through here, kind of highlighting some of the aspects of the proposed ordinance and then some of the wildlife issues we deal with here in Pocatello. Real quick, I just wanted to emphasize some of what Steve said. What is the Urban Wildlife Task Force? It's a dedicated group of community volunteers that came out of that meeting we had last May with varying perspectives, experiences, and interests, and they're really working to address challenges associated with urban wildlife. This is not a fish and game-led task force. We have been sitting with them along the way as technical advisors, but this is really your community members coming together to address a problem. What is the mission of the task force? It's to reduce potential safety concerns for humans, pets, and wildlife themselves, as well as reducing damage to private property while maintaining the aesthetic and social benefits that wildlife provide. I think that's a pretty good mission statement. I think one of the key points in there is that we all love wildlife and want to see wildlife, but we want to address these places where we're having problems. And so one of the cool things about Idaho, about Pocatello, are observations and experiences like this. In no way, shape, or form is the task force or this ordinance intended to diminish these types of experiences. What we're really after is to address some of these types of scenarios. In the upper right there is a moose chasing someone in Chubbuck. That was 4 or 5 years ago. Upper left, a mule deer on the front porch that could be property damage or just risk to humans. The big picture in the middle, I picked that deer up just last week in the Johnny Creek area that was hit. We often get deer stuck in fences as they're navigating this urban setting. That photo in the lower left is 2 yearling mule deer that fell into a window well that we removed a few years ago. So these are the types of situations that we think an ordinance will help address. Right off the bat, I wanted to just give you guys the components of the ordinance. What are the nuts and bolts, so that you can have it kind of in your mind as I go through some of the wildlife we deal with. The way it's currently written, it would be unlawful for any person to intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly feed or attract wildlife. The exceptions to that would be birds, other than wild turkey and waterfowl, tree squirrels, and livestock or pets. We still want people to be able to put out their hummingbird feeders, their bird feeders, and enjoy those opportunities. There is a recommendation for those types of feeders in the ordinance that they be at least 5 feet above ground to reduce the opportunities for other animals to get into those feeders. This ordinance would apply to all areas within the Pocatello city limits. The violations that are written in there, a first offense would result in a warning or a notice of violation. Subsequent offenses would then get fines ranging from $75 to $750, and any other penalties authorized by law. I'd like to note, like right now, Fish and Game or other law enforcement officers, we cannot cite people for feeding in city limits, and that's why this ordinance is before you today. Last but not least, education will be paramount. If this is adopted, we will really need to work and help the people understand why and how to deal with urban wildlife. The task force in Fish and Game has already put some materials together to start to educate people and help them understand some of the downsides of feeding and how to live in and amongst wildlife. So I'm going to jump into some of the species that we deal with here in Pocatello. I wanted to start with a slide on how did we get here. Wildlife populations in general in this area are thriving, especially mule deer, turkey, and geese. The upper right graph, that's just a figure of a deer population in southeast Idaho. You can see that trajectory of going up over the last 20 years. What's also interesting in the lower right, it's kind of hard to see. Idaho is bright red on my screen. It's not as clear there, but Idaho is the fastest growing state in the nation right now, and Pocatello is certainly experiencing some of that growth. We've all seen some of the developments and urban expansion in Pocatello, and so we've got increasing wildlife populations and an increasing human population, and the overlap and potential for conflict is high, and that's why I think we're talking to you today. I wanted to touch on, I'm going to talk about mule deer for a few minutes here. We often get asked at Fish and Game, why don't you just increase hunting tags to address some of our problems with urban deer? This illustration is to hopefully explain why that probably wouldn't work. Those are locations of GPS collared deer that we have in the hunting units surrounding Pocatello. The one dot in Pocatello there's at our office when a collar was turned on. That one's not actually a deer. The rest of them are deer locations. But the point here is that these deer are migratory. They go down low in the winter, they go up high in the summer. In Pocatello, we're really dealing with resident deer that we could increase tags all we wanted in these places and it wouldn't address the deer we have in Pocatello. So one of the major concerns with deer in particular is roadkill. There's some data from Bannock County in our roadkill database. In 2017, there was 135 mule deer killed in Bannock County. Looking at the last 3 years, there was almost 400 deer killed. That photo in the lower right is a wildlife on the road crossing sign on South 5th by Century High School, and there's a deer that was killed sitting behind that sign. As Steve mentioned, this is just documented roadkills that people either salvaged or we went and picked up. There are countless more that maybe was a near miss or there was a broken leg or they wandered off somewhere away from the road and died. So this is an underrepresentation of what is hit in Idaho or in Bannock County. And I want to point out too that this is an issue for mule deer. There's some concern for the wildlife themselves. There's concern for damage to vehicles, and then most importantly, concern for human safety in these collisions. This is something I thought was pretty interesting, just to give some financial background to what this means. This is some data from State Farm Insurance. They put a map together giving you the probability of hitting a deer in each state. Idaho is in the darker gray color. It's one of the highest likelihoods of hitting a deer. Idaho is. The stat that they gave us was that 1 out of every 151 drivers hits a deer in Idaho. That was for last year. What does that mean for damage to vehicles? The average claim last year was just over $4,000 for vehicles that hit a deer. If you look at the 135 deer we documented in Bannock County last year, that's over $500,000 in damage to vehicles. And so there's a huge, not just the human safety and the issues with our wildlife, but there's a huge financial issue here as well. Moving on, I'm going to touch on turkeys real quick. Turkeys have been doing very well across southeast Idaho, and we've seen some of that here in Pocatello. The prominent areas are in Pocatello Creek, Johnny Creek, and Gibson Jack. We've got some small groups showing up in other places. Idaho Fish and Game has moved 35 turkeys from Pocatello Creek near the KOA. We moved a group in 2013, and then after a few years, that group grew back up and we were forced to move them again. Just this last winter, across the region, so a bunch of the smaller communities around here, we moved over 150 turkeys. And when turkey populations get high, they roost in trees, they roost on rooftops, they trample vegetation, they defecate in yards, and they can become a huge headache. That last bullet, for private landowners with commercial agriculture, if they have problems, we call it a depredation, and we help them with things like kill permits. We've had over 20 of those in the last year. So turkeys are doing very well, and it's occurring here in Pocatello, and we think there's potential for more problems if they continue to grow. Waterfowl. This pertains probably more to city parks and golf courses, maybe some residential properties, but with waterfowl and in particular geese, the Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services, they're the responding agency with goose problems. So they provided me some data to share with you. This is over the last 5 years. They lethally removed 98 geese. This is for southeast Idaho, so Idaho Falls, Blackfoot, Pocatello. They trapped and moved over 1,000 geese. They destroyed over 500 eggs and over 200 nests. And drilling down, looking in the actual cities at golf courses, parks, it's resulted in over $8,000 in damages. We assisted Wildlife Services just this last year trying to remove some geese from Riverside Golf Course. And so there's a growing goose population, and that picture in the lower right is one of our officers it's hard to see, there's an arrow on the ground. One of the things we see, people feeding geese, they get close to them. We've seen some issues where animals are injured or tortured. This was a goose that had an arrow in its neck and was running around Sacagawea Park. Last but not least, mountain lions. We've all probably noticed in the news this year several articles. We get lots of calls of observations. Every year we deal with some type of mountain lion issue in the winter in Pocatello. Primary prey for mountain lions are mule deer, and so it makes sense that we have mountain lions in and around this community with the mule deer herd that we have. What we see is that mountain lions that are young and experienced, ones that are very old, or individuals who are inept at catching deer, they start to resort to easier prey items such as house cats, small dogs, and can become a problem. When there are feed sites put out, it creates very predictable travel routes and feeding locations for deer that make hunting deer very easy for mountain lions. And so that artificial feeding can really facilitate unwanted species such as mountain lions being around. These pictures, that upper right, that was a mountain lion we moved out of the town of Rockland this winter. The one in the middle, kind of hard to see, that's a snapshot from a Channel 8 story. That was last winter. We moved a female and 4 of her cubs out of the Johnny Creek area. The lower right, that's 3 cubs that mom was missing for whatever reason. They were having a hard time catching deer on their own and came down low. And this was a residence that had lots of pets and turkeys around their house. So those are the kind of big species we deal with, but they're not alone. We've all probably dealt with skunks in our yard. They can be pretty detrimental to your nice green lawn. We don't have a lot of black bears in this area, but that is a bear that we caught in Lava Hot Springs a couple years ago that was coming into a yard with a lot of apples. The lower left, that's a moose right down by Pocatello High School, walking down the highway. Or
I've got a picture of 4 deer in the same intersection.
Do you? Yeah. And then in raccoons, they're fairly mischievous and can be a headache as well. So what are the problems with feeding? I think a lot of people put out feed and with the best of intentions. They want to see wildlife, take pictures, maybe they think they're helping the animals, but there are unintended consequences with that. Animals become habituated, and by that they become more comfortable around people, they become more bold. In some cases they can become aggressive. It can change their behavior. So if you have a feed site out for deer, for example, maybe they're crossing a road to get to that they otherwise wouldn't cross, creating a hazard on the roadway, putting the deer at risk of getting hit, those types of things. So they depart from what I would call a more natural behavior to these very predictable ones centered on feed. Anytime you concentrate animals in a confined spot, the potential for disease and disease spread is increased. As I mentioned before, you can attract unwanted species. What is appealing for a deer might be appealing for skunks, raccoons. You might have mountain lions following those deer in. The next bullet, I think, is one people don't often think about. Again, it's with the best of intentions, but artificial feed for wildlife can result in nutritional imbalances. Deer are a really good example. They have very specific gut bacteria to digest very specific foods during the different seasons. And in the winter, for example, if you feed deer hay that's high in protein, they don't have the bacteria to deal with it that time of year, and they bloat and can die. And so in Pocatello, you see deer that kind of look scraggly. Their coat's not as pristine. I think a lot of that's because they're not getting the nutrition they need because they're eating the wrong things. And last but not least, maybe someone's okay with having deer or other wildlife in their yard, but they don't stay in that yard 24/7. So there's unintended consequences for neighbors, causing damage and putting people at risk. So if an ordinance was adopted, what would it do? I want to emphasize it will not eliminate urban wildlife or conflicts. What we think it will do is very much reduce the potential for human safety risk and property damage. And the mechanism for that will be forcing animals to adopt a more natural behavior. They won't be cued into these specific feed locations. It'll reduce roadkill and public safety concerns, private property damage, aggressive or abnormal behavior, and reduce those instances where we're attracting unwanted species like mountain lions. I wanted to highlight Pocatello is not alone. This urban wildlife issues are very common across the entire country. I wanted to highlight some communities close to us that are dealing with similar issues, and the prominent species is mule deer. Missoula, Montana, they're, I would say, a little behind where we are, but they are struggling with what to do. They are in discussions right now, surveying their public, trying to figure out how to address some of their problems. Helena's had a plan in place and an ordinance since 2007. Cody, Wyoming, they have a feeding ordinance in place, and they've been up and running for a while. Thermopolis, Wyoming, very similar. Down in Paris, Idaho, they're discussing how to deal with deer right there on the shore of Bear Lake. Logan, Utah, they've had an ordinance in place for a while. And then around Salt Lake, all those small communities, Alpine, Bonneville, Highland, they are all dealing with urban wildlife issues. And the common thread of all of these is development of some type of task force, implementation of a feeding ordinance, and then what happens after that varies a lot from community to community. Some stop there, some take additional measures, but there's a lot to learn from some of these other communities, and we're certainly not alone here in Pocatello. So to summarize, I think an ordinance, it will reduce habituation of animals, reduce those conflict and safety concerns. Ultimately, it'll be better for the wildlife, and hopefully reduce abundance and frequency of animals living in the city limits. But wildlife will always be a part of Pocatello. This isn't the silver bullet that's going to eliminate everything, and I think that's okay. People like seeing wildlife and like being around them. I just think this will help reduce some of those conflicts and damages. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
If we were to do an ordinance, how would we find out if people are feeding deer? I mean, would people in the community report it, or how would that work? And then what is your vision of who would be enforcing that ordinance?
So we get a lot of calls already that, hey, my neighbor's feeding deer. We've gone up and talked to numerous people suggesting maybe they not do it, but we can't force them to do it. So I think that people would very much call in and say someone's feeding. I think the education aspect will be very important to let people know why not to feed. Just this week, when the press release went out that this was going to get discussed today, a resident called us and said they had no idea that feeding was bad and they are voluntarily going to stop. And so I think it's just going to be a slowly educating people, the word getting out. As far as enforcement, any peace officer, so the local police department, our fish and game officers could enforce and write citations.
Okay. My other question was, do you have any statistics from the other communities that have implemented an ordinance on how that has, like if it has been effective for them and
Yeah, to rattle, I can't rattle too much off the top of my head, but a lot of the ones that I highlighted, it's in the last 5 years that they've implemented it, and so they're very much assessing the successes. Helena's been a really good example because they've been up and running for over 10 years now. They had really good data on roadkill and nuisance complaints. Since they adopted an ordinance, those went down. They followed up with some culling operations, and so they're doing some additional measures, but they've very much been effective and seen a major reduction in vehicle collisions and complaints from communities. But I think there's some other communities we could look at a little closer. Utah actually hired a biologist to, she was getting her master's degree through their wildlife department, studying urban wildlife issues and looking at all those small communities, what's effective, what's not. And I've been in contact with her and certainly could get some more info there.
I have some questions kind of related to Heidi's first question about enforcement. First, I was just wondering, do you have the staff capacity or power to enforce? And I mean, would this put an additional burden on Fish and Game, or are you prepared to?
I don't think it'd be an additional burden. Like I said, we're already fielding those calls and responding to those. We have a local officer that the Pocatello area and surrounding is their patrol district, and we have several other officers that could respond. I think it would definitely take assistance from the city officers as well, but yeah, I think it's very doable.
And the education part of it, I was just wondering how you see making that happen. Would you do some kind of campaign or produce materials or advertising, or I mean, how would that happen?
I think it would have to be a variety of sources. For a long time, we've put brochures, things like that together that you can hand out, go door to door. Social media, I think, will be a very important avenue to get this out. Press releases. So we don't have an exact plan on how that would roll out, but I think it would include a variety of different methods for getting the word out. And one of the things in there with the violations, we put in there that first one would be a warning, because this might catch a lot of people off guard. And so if it's new, and so let's not ding them with a citation. Let's go talk to them, give them some of those educational materials, and give them an opportunity to understand why this is a problem.
Do you have budget for that?
Linda, most of the audience out here today are members of that wildlife task force. I am also a member. I've been since before the election. I started with this group, and they are committed to taking an active role in education in the community and getting out and doing press releases and community meetings and making sure that the community is aware of the problem and the solution that they're proposing at this point before this becomes something that we have to resort to a culling operation. I don't think anybody wants to go around killing deer in people's yards.
Right.
Well,
and I was wondering about the budget for the education materials. Would that be shared between Fish and Game and the task force? Or, I mean, could they contribute? Or do you all have money to produce those materials? Or?
So Fish and Game can certainly assist and provide some educational materials with our budget, and then we'd probably need to seek out some additional sources depending on what method we take. But education is an important program just within our agency for a variety of other things, and this would fit well in there. But depending on the type of education we're doing, we might need to seek other funding.
Okay.
Roger. A couple of points. This is an effort to stop a problem before it becomes a bigger problem. I know of other communities where they've had to open up archery hunting on golf courses and shut down golf courses and stuff like that. I mean, it just can get out of control. And not necessarily mule deer, but back east, they've done a lot of stuff like that. And it's not just deer.
No.
You go out to our different parks and you'll find goose droppings all over it, and it's not very good for kids to play in.
No.
And it really compromises sand. So this is an effort to stem something that's getting out of hand. And I will give a couple personal. This year, lived in the same house 26 years. Light winter, but I had one of my evergreen trees, it's 3 trees together. I noticed that it's been trimmed down quite a bit by the deer. I had deer tracks in the snow almost every day in my yard this year, and that's not been a common course. And I'm up from Johnny Creek on the West Bench. And so I've got a picture of a turkey standing on a car at the Red Lion Inn. That's not good on paint jobs. So, we've got this incursion of wildlife. The reason for it is people are lazy and they like to live in the lowest place too. Just like animals like to winter low, we do too. And so we've taken over their habitat. But now we have to find a way to remediate that. And this congregating thing is a huge factor. There have been mountain lions in my area. And it's a small step for lions to become habituated to prey and see a child and see prey as a child too. We've seen that in some other communities. So this is a proactive effort to stem something before it gets way out of hand. And so I understand what they're doing. I'm very engaged with the wildlife community, and I've noticed the encroachment, and so I'm all for this going forward. And by the way, one of the best ways of communication is when somebody gets their third ticket and they have to pay $500 or something. You'd be amazed how many people will know about that.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the best educational forums we could do and get some publicity is if we got all the judges that would hear these cases, if we could just get them before they ever hear a case and kind of educate them on the problem and what we're trying to abate with this issue. I think that would go a long ways to where our judges understood the nature of this law.
That's a good point.
Mina, you had a...
Yeah, I had a comment. You guys say you had a meeting with people who are in your community or in the South Pocatello, right, over there. Did they have any opposition? Like, what were some of the oppositions to this ordinance?
Yeah, so that meeting we had in May, we had the mayor and folks from the city there, and it was at our Fish and Game office, and it was just open to everybody that wanted to come talk about urban deer specifically. And it was very open. People raised their hands, stood up, and kind of spoke to their experiences and what they thought, and it was very split. A lot of people made comments that we live where they live, and it's part of being in Pocatello, and we should just deal with it. And other people stood up and said, I like wildlife, but my gardens, my fences, I'm getting chased as I go to my car. We need help, we need to do something. And so the opposition was that really this is part of where we live and we should deal with it. And the other side was, we like wildlife, but we're struggling with some problems.
So, but there weren't any particular concerns because the ordinance isn't talking about killing deers. It's talking about people not feeding wild animals, which I thought would be common sense. Like, we shouldn't be doing that
Right.
anyway. But yeah, I had 8-9 deer in my yard up in Satterfield area,
Yeah.
which is pretty strange. But I have another quick question. So what about people who do have like apple trees and pear trees and plum trees? Are you are they going to be fined? Are you saying that those are okay, but personally going out and feeding an animal is an issue?
Those are okay. There's some language in the ordinance relative to that. So apples or fruit that fall and is just in your yard, that would not be a violation. We do see some instances where people rake and pile them up for deer or others to come in and feed on. That would be a violation, but just an apples falling from your tree, we can't fault people for that.
Okay. Thank you.
One of the things that I don't think we brought out enough either, during the rut, there could be people killed by an aggressive buck. They don't distinguish well when they just are that ruddy. And I think it was probably 15 years ago, there was a woman attacked out jogging down Preston area or someplace like that.
Yeah.
And she was lucky to escape with her life from what that deer was doing to her.
Yeah.
And we got to understand, we got kids walking to school, we got people out jogging, we got people on bicycles, all that type of stuff. We're just, what we're trying to do, I think, with this ordinance is discourage those type of interfaces so much and get a handle on this population.
The the biggest notice animal is deer. But I know people that in the past have been feeding foxes, feeding coyotes, actively feeding badgers within the Pocatello city limits. And when you start looking at the disease factor on wildlife, you know, some of those smaller animals are very likely targets for things like rabies. And the spread of that to domestic animals, there's already an ordinance, a state law in place in all the counties that adjoin Wyoming because of brucellosis.
Correct.
Potential spread. But it's only enforced in those counties because of the population of brucellosis that exists in the Yellowstone elk herd. And this is something that I think we're going to see more and more of as we see diseases moving into Idaho, things like CWD, which is just miles, probably is already in Idaho, but it hasn't been detected yet. And this is something that people need to understand. This is not just to protect people. This is also to protect the animals. I served on the Wildlife Feeding Committee for Fish and Game for 6 years. And one of the things we tried to do every year when we had mandatory feedings was move those feed sites so that we didn't concentrate those disease organisms in the soil where it could be picked up by animals the next year. But it's a problem when you start feeding.
Well, and I think it's fair to say that when you find a carcass from a deer that was hit, there might have been 2 or 3 other deer that were hit and are either maimed for life or went off to die a slow, agonizing death.
That's a good point.
And I really think that, so when you see just times by 3 the number of animal encounters, and it's just getting out of hand.
So I asked our attorney to come up real quick. Jared, have you seen this proposed ordinance? And
Good morning, Mayor and City Council. Jared Johnson, City Attorney. I've reviewed the draft version of the ordinance. I didn't want to do anything until council had a chance to look at it and decide if they wanted to proceed forward with possible adoption of the ordinance. So it would need to be vetted through my department, and we would look at it, adapt it to our standards, plug it into our code at the right spot, as well as make sure it complies with Idaho law. So there would be some definite revisions that would need to take place to the ordinance. But yes, I've looked at it.
so from what I'm hearing on the dais, why don't you and your department
I actually had some discussion. Sorry. Are you instructing him to do that?
I was just going to see if he would look at it and do it and,
well, that's okay.
prepare it for...
I just had a question, I guess. Is the ordinance itself the crucial ticket? Because it sounds to me like the community outreach and letting people actually know is the bigger issue. And so I guess the only reason I'm asking that is I hate to make an ordinance and then people aren't aware of it and we have no means of enforcing it, you know? So if we know that we do, then I certainly think that
So
that's good. But
my thought on that is the education piece will need to start now while we're preparing. It's not going to be prepared tomorrow.
okay.
He's got to go through it. It's got to be vetted through the legal department. It's probably going to take a month or 2 to get that all done so it fits within Idaho law and everything like that. So the education piece can be happening, that this is coming, this is going to start being there. There will be a public hearing on it, and then there will be a decision to pass that ordinance and set it. And then I believe even after the ordinance is done, that education piece would continue to go. I think in order for the education piece to be moved forward, they need to know that we're moving forward with an ordinance. Because we don't want to send them out saying, hey, we're doing this, and then nothing happening. So I think they kind of go hand in hand, in my opinion.
And I think we need to develop the ordinance because it shows that we see the problem. And it's enough that we're rallying to embrace that a solution of sorts. It's not a full solution, but it's a solution of sorts. And they have been doing education for a long time. But people are slow to pick up on it. It's not been out there, but anybody that's aware of wildlife knows that you shouldn't be feeding them. But you know, it's people that see wildlife as a replacement for a pet or something like that. And I understand an emotional development, but at the same time, we have wildlife that needs to be treated as wildlife, and we need to take a stand, I believe, as the council, to say wildlife should be honored as wildlife and protected as wildlife, and not have these incursions and the suffering that they go through, malnutrition, wildlife and car encounters, all those type of things, the feeding in terms of disease, all those things are factors that I think we need to respond to.
Well, and people need to understand that part of nature's plan is that wildlife are going to die in the winter. It doesn't matter what we feed them, doesn't matter what happens, they're going to die. That's part of the process. And if you go feed the bread to the geese, or you feed the pellets to the deer, or let them in your compost pile, or pile up your fruit, they're still going to die in the winter. That's just part of the process. It keeps them from overrunning the planet. And we need something to make sure people understand that that's not acceptable.
But I think to your question directly, I really think the education piece we've got to have the ordinance moving forward so the education piece can be moving forward, so that they can, when we can get the word out that it's happening, we can have a good public hearing on it, we can move forward with it, whatever the council wishes to do, and then that education piece will continue to go. But I think from what I'm hearing and I understand it sounds like we're interested in getting an ordinance moving, but let's...
I'm experienced in this area. I was driving a demo car, and one of those deer ran into the side of it. Cost me, not the dealer, $5,000. I've had a couple of those experiences. I have 3 carcasses on the lot adjacent to my house. Only one of them is picked clean. So the cougar cleaned one of them and the other 2 are just there. But I don't think we have to legislate absolutely everything. I mean, I don't like us to have to put everything on the books. I think there's got to be a way in which we can educate people without having to legislate.
And at least maybe we could start with that, with some education.
Immediately.
And see,
Yeah.
and then if it gets to the point where we've done a ton of education, we've done a ton of outreach, and then we still need it, I guess I just haven't seen that, and so that's why I'm asking.
But have you already been doing education? I mean, it seems like you have.
Aha, the educator.
And how successful has that been?
Jennifer?
Sorry. Hi, my name is Jennifer Jackson, and I'm the Regional Conservation Educator for Idaho Fish and Game. I started work here about 13 years ago, and if you have the time, you can go back and look in news articles, radio scripts, TV programs, and I've been touting the winter feeding of wildlife by the public since I've been here. It's been an ongoing process. I can tell you, I personally have a friend who says, yes, I read your news releases, I read your articles, and I chuckle to myself as I throw apples to the deer in my backyard. So the issue we have is people are getting the education. We're getting the phone calls from folks that say, what's the problem with feeding? We're going to do it anyway. We'll see letters to the editor from folks that are upset with Fish and Game for saying that feeding is wrong. And an ordinance that what that would do is say to those who are not willing to stop feeding, it would hopefully be a deterrent to them continuing their actions. Because the education we're doing so far, some are getting the message, a lot are not, and some don't even care.
So do we need to go into the county as well as Chubbuck to make sure this is a united effort?
So what we've seen in other cities, with their feeding ordinances or with other efforts done by task force, you'll have a city that they'll start with a city ordinance, then the next step is to go for a county ordinance, and then you might have an adjoining community, like here in our area we have Chubbuck and Pocatello right next to each other, and it's a process where yes, the ordinances are oftentimes just one step after another to get everyone on board.
Have you approached any of, like Chubbuck or the county?
So at the original meeting we had last May, everyone was invited to come. So we had representatives from county, cities, members of the public from all parts of this Bannock County area that came to that meeting. This task force is going to address all the the challenges that we're experiencing with wildlife in this community, and that includes Chubbuck, that includes Bannock County as well. So we do have people that are interested and want to be, kind of a part of this task force as far as our next steps. So we started with the city of Pocatello. Our plan as a task force is to work with the county and also to go to Chubbuck and make it a kind of a united effort, like you said, but we're starting here.
I was at that meeting in May last year, and I saw some people that when they were able to understand the gravity of the situation, they changed from being people that were so wildlife at any cost, so to speak, to where they understood that they were putting a detriment on wildlife. I really think that there has to be a stand taken by the city of Pocatello that says we're like other communities. We want to protect our wildlife. We want to protect our people, and we need to make this in a way that says we understand the gravity and it's a priority. And the only way you manage something usually as a public entity is to have some sort of law. If you don't, we can get out there and we can do everything, but until we have some form of policy, we're not doing anything. So I think we need an ordinance.
I agree.
I agree.
I think that we should check with our various departments that would be called upon to enforce this and get some feedback from them, because it's not doing these guys any favors if we're telling them we're going to enforce this and we don't have the means to do it. So I would want to at least verify that.
I would weigh in on that. I don't think our police are going to be overloaded, because if they have to go investigate an accident between a car and a deer on Bannock Highway, they're still going to be spending time, and they got to help wait until a tow truck gets there oftentimes. So I don't think it's going to be a huge shift of labor on our police force. I really think the big part of this is going to be, because we're going to curtail some of those things, I really think the big part of this will be the Fish and Game having the power, because of our ordinance, to tell people, okay, I've talked to you, I'm going to give you this warning. If I have to come back, it escalates from here. They have us standing behind them as they go out and enforce. I think they're going to be the primary entities there, because I don't know, I assume that a lot of times somebody will call you and say, I hit a deer and it limped off, then you guys have to go check it out. So I think that as we pull down those type of things, we shift their time over to more of the enforcement side. And I just don't see it as creating huge issues in labor, because it's just a shift of labor.
I don't know that an ordinance is going to stop the vehicle deer collisions at all.
But if
It will eventually.
Eventually,
it's going to
We can
deter.
reduce the population
How about
within the city
stopping?
limits, or we can use feeding sites outside the city limits to attract those deer away from the community. Then that will eventually reduce the population and the probability we're going to have more cars, especially based off Bannock Highway.
If somebody's feeding and they have to cross the highway to get to that food, and they're not, you're going to stop some of that.
It would
They're going across Bannock Highway to get a drink in the Portneuf. And the only solution in my mind is to put reflectors on these deer so that I can see them.
If you have your lights on, you'll see their eyes.
teach them how to read the deer crossing signs too.
Set up specific places where they can.
That's an education campaign.
But no, this is not a silver bullet, and we will still have deer hit. We will still have conflicts, but I think this slowly will reduce those instances. And if I can show you a stat in a couple of years that we went from 135 to 85, that's a big deal in my mind in terms of collisions.
This is just one way that we're trying to make the deer or other wildlife a little more uncomfortable in their urban environment. This is just the beginning. I mean, this task force has only been together for 5 months. And we started here. And we are going, if we get this through, it will be a starting point for us.
Well, and I would remind you that when the Golf Advisory Committee was here last month, they told us that they need to go hassle the geese that nest on the Portneuf to try to get them not to nest because they have a huge liability in terms of what the damage is they do on the golf course. So this is just about deer. It's about finding a way to limit some of the damage wildlife does to humans and to limit what humans do to wildlife.
I think too, we're focusing too on the road mortality issues, and we're talking about some of the damages to property, which are real. And then again, getting back to the habituating of wildlife and having them behave differently. I've taken phone calls where we have animals that are, I've taken phone calls from folks in some of these areas. They'll say, my husband was out jogging and got chased by deer. A woman called in and said her dog was kicked to death by a deer. It was at her neighbor's yard eating food that had been placed for it, and her dog was barking at the deer, and the deer had turned and kicked her dog. We have situations in parks we mentioned earlier where geese and ducks are being lured in and become very habituated to feeding from people, and then other individuals use that opportunity to go in and torture and harm these animals. And it's pretty sobering when you have to put some of these animals down because they've been tortured by somebody who's been able to lure them in. So we're also having to look at some of those other aspects as well. It's not going to eliminate all those problems, but if we can reduce some of those challenges, and we can use this as just one of the tools in the toolbox that we're going to use to get to helping to reduce this problem, it's a good starting point.
One of the things, part of Zach's slide showed about 400 deer in Bannock County over the course of 3 years. When I was on the Mule Deer Foundation and serving on the Wildlife Feeding Committee, we did a survey over near Soda Springs. We knew how many deer had been pulled off a specific stretch of road and picked up dead. We walked the sagebrush 50 yards on either side of the highway and found 7 deer for every one that had been reported that had been hit, wandered off, and died.
Well, it sounds like we need to prepare an ordinance, but it sounds like we probably want an opportunity to visit with the police department that's going to be part of this enforcement as well. And so why don't you start looking at the ordinance and going from there, and we'll see if we can't get the police chief to come in and talk about it and see what effect it's going to have on that department as well, because anything we do, we feed the deer, there's unintended consequences. We create an ordinance, there's unintended consequences, and we just want to mitigate all of those as much as we possibly can. And so it sounds like there's support to at least have the discussion and have a public hearing on it. And
I'm not opposed to it, Mr. Mayor.
No,
I'm not opposed. I just don't like to have to legislate everything in our lives.
And I agree with that, but sometimes we have to do what we got to do, and I think it's worthy of the discussion, and we'll go from there. So
Need to involve Parks and Rec at all?
we'll probably have a discussion with Parks and Rec. I mean, everybody's going to be affected a little bit. I mean, with parks and geese and badgers, it sounds like. We got badgers running around town now.
We got badgers coming into the zoo.
That's true. They're fighting to get into the fence, not out of the fence. We can't figure that one out.
Well, we got marmots out at the cemetery.
Yep. So, yeah. And so there's some issues that we've got to address, and
And I'm
we'll start
assuming we're
addressing
going to
it.
have like signs up at parks, like, based on days, you don't feed wild animals. It's just good manners.
But I think we just give our departments a heads up, and if they need to talk to us about it, they can, or we can, as part of our public hearing, ask them questions.
Yeah, we'll have them there. So we'll get the answers for us.
Thank you.
Okay, yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will move on to agenda item 5, glass recycling program proposal. Sanitation staff will be present to discuss a glass recycling program proposal for the city. 10 drop-off sites with 3-yard containers for glass-only items are being proposed.
Maybe.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Jeff Mansfield, Public Works Director and City Engineer. Today we've got a presentation regarding glass recycling. We'll go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves and then we'll get started. Sure.
I'm Debbie Brady. I'm the recycling coordinator for the City of Pocatello, and thank you for having us.
I'm John Lair, President of Momentum Recycling out of Salt Lake City. Thanks for having us.
Brian Willard, Operations Supervisor with the Sanitation Department.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited to make this presentation. So we'll just move forward. How's that? Okay, in 2010, we did a glass recycling feasibility study, and some of the critical success factors that we pointed out was that we had to have political support at all levels of municipal government for the program to be successful. We needed a great educational campaign about the benefits of glass recycling, and we would develop that and deliver it to the public and to the public officials. The city is advised to take note of the significant widespread public support that a glass recycling program generally garners, making such a program difficult to dispense with once it's initiated. We all know that one, don't we? Financially, a program in most cases fails to generate significant revenue and incurs some expenditures to keep it in operation, so it's not a moneymaker. Generally, a program requires a notable commitment of time, money, manpower, and resources to make it successful and efficient. And last but not least, successful glass recycling programs require a well-identified, stable, and consistent local market for the recycled glass, which is a cullet. In January, several of us went from the City of Pocatello and Bannock County landfill, toured the Momentum recycling facility in Salt Lake City, and concluded that they could be the end users we need for a glass recycling program. So I would like to introduce John Lair from Momentum Recycling, and he will discuss some of the items going forward.
Sure, yeah, thank you again for having me. So in our operation, first of all, we've been in business for 10 years. We operate a plant in Salt Lake City and a plant in Denver. We obviously believe pretty strongly in glass recycling, pretty committed to this. One thing about glass recycling is that we're kind of the middle player in this process. We're more like a refiner. We take the waste glass, we clean it, sort it by color, get rid of moisture and contaminants, size it, and then sell it as a raw material to other manufacturers, ideally container manufacturing, more new bottles. And when that's not available, fiberglass insulation is kind of globally the second largest user of recycled glass. We're fortunate in the Salt Lake City area to have a large fiberglass insulation facility. It's an Owens Corning plant in Nephi, Utah. It's about 90 miles from our facility. We ship them about 40 tons of refined glass, recycled glass every day that they use in their furnaces as a replacement.
40 tons?
40 tons a day.
That's a lot of glass.
And that's after it's been through our process. So we're at about half capacity as well, hence our desire to work with the city here. We'd like more material into our facility. The fiberglass plant that we work with, the Owens Corning facility, it's one of the newest plants in their network nationwide. It's one of the most modern. It has one of the lowest cost per unit. The point there is that even during recessionary times, that plant does not stop. It keeps going. So it kind of trickles down from there. As long as they're taking the recycled material, we can do our job, and therefore we can ensure that all of the partners that we work with for supply of waste glass can keep their programs running. Typically, we enter into long-term relationships with all of the entities that supply us feedstock into our plant. Again, we're committed and here for the long haul. There are other products that are made with recycled glass. As I mentioned, container manufacturing and fiberglass insulation are the largest. Those industries can't use everything. So for example, in our Salt Lake City facility, Owens Corning does not like brown glass in their ovens. There's iron in brown glass that causes some havoc to their heating elements in their ovens. So we use the brown glass for other markets. Sometimes we do exchanges with our facility in Denver where that brown glass is turned into containers at bottle manufacturers in Denver. But especially during the summer months, we make sandblast media, we make water filter media for swimming pool water filters. It can be used in concrete applications as coatings for concrete surfaces. There's a range of uses for recycled glass. So when we can't use the glass for fiberglass insulation or for containers, we have other markets that are available. And I'm proud to say that in all the years we've been operating our facility, every bit of glass that's come into our facility has found its way into a beneficial use, either a fiberglass container or one of the other markets that I've mentioned to you. So that's kind of how recycling glass works, at least in our world.
So let me give you a little information about the program that we're excited about hopefully setting up. We would have 10 drop-off sites with 3-yard dumpsters for glass recycling. Bannock County Landfill will also host a container, and they'll bring it to our glass storage site as needed. And the containers are clearly marked as glass-only containers. I have a better picture of that. On the side is the opening, and it's clearly defined there. Pictures of the type of glass accepted will be on the doors. And then it just specifically says glass recycling.
So just a comment here real quick. So this is one of our standard 3-yard dumpsters that sanitation has converted into a glass recycling dumpster. Talking with John this morning, I mean, he's pretty impressed with the innovation and the ideas that went into this dumpster, and it sounds like maybe there may be other entities that are looking at adopting something similar to this. And so our sanitation department has done a really good job on manufacturing things, and so Debbie will continue to tell you about some of the aspects of it.
It's really a cool aspect. The door opens on the side, and it's a 16 by 16 opening. So it's large enough for most glass. It's kind of like the old-fashioned flower bins that grandparents used to have, and I don't know
about
maybe.
those too.
And if needed, we would put a drop box at the sanitation department for larger items like windows, if that's need be down the road. It has a lock bar across the lid so people can't get into it. That was one of our concerns about safety, and reduces the opportunity for vandalism. It's really a great, John and Arlen, our welder, and Arlen, the sanitation superintendent, came up with this model, and it is awesome.
Rick had a great idea. He said you should patent this and then we sell it to other cities. That could be our moneymaker.
And then the acceptable glass recycling containers, we'll have that listed on the side. And boy, you look at it and there's a lot of glass containers that we'll be able to take and get out of the waste stream. So it's really cool. But that'll be on all of the containers. And then we'll also have our marketing, what is that on the side? Branding on the side there. And then our decals will also show the types that are not accepted, which would be the automotive glass, windshields, porcelain and ceramics, the light bulbs, mirrors, and Pyrex.
So another key concept here, when we talked about this a little bit this morning, John made a good comment. He's like, it's easier to say what types of glass are not accepted than it is to tell you what types of glass are accepted. If you look at the previous pages, most types of glass are accepted. And maybe if John, you could talk a little bit about the sorting process or what happens if we happen to get a ceramic dish in our glass. Can you maybe elaborate on that process a little bit?
Sure. So our plants are equipped with optical sorting capabilities. So basically, the contaminants the system can be programmed to detect and eject contaminants like ceramics, and Pyrex uses different light wave detection technologies to detect, and then air handling air jets to detect particles. This can happen down to 1/8 of an inch, so it's very effective. We certainly work with all of our education materials through all of our partners to discourage the problem items. but they happen anyway, and we're prepared for that. And again, in all the years that we've been doing this, we've never rejected a load from any of our suppliers. We find that the combination of the equipment and the education with our partners works quite well.
Thank you.
Momentum has been great in helping us with all the branding and all the decals and everything, because this isn't their first rodeo, which has been nice. You know, don't you just make things happen with other companies that have already done it and municipalities. The next slide is the proposed glass bin locations that we have. We went around and looked, Hannah and I, and came up with some areas that we thought would be a great place, and we did get several approved. Sister City Park area, we would put one there. We had a drop-off recycling bin there in the past, so I think this will be a great place for a glass one. The wellness, the fairgrounds, we're still working on them. We're just waiting to hear back. Hopefully we'll have something up in that area. City Hall, Ridley's on Main, Albertsons, and we're waiting on the parking lot by the dog park, UPRR parking lot, and then the ISU Holt Arena area, and they're really excited, and they have several other spots that they'd be interested in down the road too. So we're really short on the north end. We've been in touch with Costco, haven't got a response back from them, but we're trying to find something more in the north end that we could put a bin at. Currently, we have tried this out. We had a bin at the Blue Healer on Bannock Highway, and they loved it. We just wanted to see if our truck could actually, you know, dump it without breaking all the glass, and if people would, you know, if they would use it. They did. Currently, we have it at the Rumors Bar out on Garrett Way, and they really like it also. So we just tried to find places that could use it, that we could make sure that our trucks would work with it and that the equipment itself would be beneficial.
I also kind of want to get, I'm sorry, I also wanted to kind of get a feel of whether or not the design worked well, and the feedback that we've gotten from both of those facilities that they love it. It's easy to use. They wish that we would leave it there and continue to allow them to use it. So yeah, it's been very positive.
Very positive. And so Brian's going to talk a little bit about.
So as what we'll do, we've been in contact with the street department. We're looking at a storage site on First Street down by the current sanitation street departments. We will have bunkers that will be a 30 by 36 by 8 foot, and will hold approximately 60 tons of glass. The bunker use about 70 blocks that we can purchase locally for about $5,000, and it would be billed, if done, in-house. The street department is going to be willing to help us set up the format of it, and we've already checked, there's no permitting required on this. Going into the cost, we've done some numbers. Like I said, the bunker blocks going to run about $4,000. Street department would be looking about $1,000 for personnel and equipment to set this up. We have plenty of 3-yard dumpsters right now, but if we had to go out and purchase dumpsters, it costs us about $8,000 to replace these. We've got a rear load truck that is actually up for trade this year, and so if we can get this going, then we will actually hold on to this truck, and it'll be dedicated for strictly glass. So that's a $30,000 trade is what we're looking at. So total startup cost would be about $43,000. Program cost annually, we'd have one operator on a truck. It figured to take about 4 hours, 1 day a week, to go around and dump these, clean up any broken glass that might be thrown on the ground. That'd be $8,000. Equipment and fuel, we're looking at about a $2,000 for the year, for a total annual cost of $10,000. The glass recycling versus landfill cost, it's anticipated Pocatello should collect about around 20 tons a month, 240 tons a year from a developed glass program. Removing 240 tons of glass from our waste stream would reduce our landfill charges by $7,000 a year. Total operating cost, $10,000 a year. The total cost to the city would then be about $3,000 to take care of this.
So, just real quick, we went down and toured the Logan facility. They currently have this operation with Momentum, and they were super excited, very happy with the program. They love it. Their citizens love it. There's different ways that we can set up the operation. We can either take the glass to them, and then they pay us some money for the glass. I believe that's how Logan does it. However, I think the thing that's probably going to work the best for us, and we've kind of discussed, is that we would collect the glass, keep it in our bunker. When we get a full bunker, Momentum would come up and pick up the glass from us and cover all the shipping charges. We would just cover the responsibility of collecting the glass, and then they would take care of all the shipping costs and everything for us.
So Momentum isn't buying the glass from us?
No.
Okay, are you guys buying glass from Logan?
Yeah, as he mentioned, yes. So in that scenario, they pay for the transport to our facility, and we pay them a price per ton for the glass. Every community has a little bit different need for how they would like that to work or need that to work. We've kind of done it all different ways. Ultimately, there is some value in the glass, and we can either compensate in the form of providing free transport or for, a price for the glass itself delivered. So, and we're agnostic.
And when we establish our contract, with your approval, that might be something that we can negotiate. Talking to your street department, in the winter we go down and pick up salt and sand in Utah, and we've got empty trucks going down, and so maybe in the winter months it makes sense for us to haul our own glass and maybe something like that. And I sorry for throwing you out on there. We had that discussion this morning, and so that's something we can figure out in the contract with it. But ultimately, it provides a benefit to the environment. It reduces the amount of waste that we're taking to the landfill. We've got another discussion coming up here in a month or so about recycling, and we're not even going to get into that one today, but hopefully this will kind of help offset some of those other issues that we're having with the global recycling issue. And this is really, as Debbie mentioned, one of the key aspects that was identified in the 2010 feasibility study was having a successful glass recycling program requires a local market, and really with Momentum, that is something that we have found. So there's a lot of benefits to it.
I'd just like to add that this really is local from our perspective, even though we're down in Salt Lake. We're the only glass recycling plant in the entire section of the West here. There's several along the West Coast. There's our plant in Salt Lake heading east. There's our plant in Denver heading east, and then you've got to go to Kansas City to find another one. So we're kind of it for this whole area. And we bring in glass from many parts of Montana, Jackson Hole, southern Utah, western Wyoming. We cast a very wide net, so you guys are very comfortably within what we consider to be our local area.
Do those locales, do they do the same sort of collection, like a few centralized places, or do they do it as part of the normal garbage pickup?
Usually it's done this way. It's done a little bit differently in other communities. So in Teton County, Wyoming, Jackson Hole area, they have staffed public drop-off locations that are covered, and they collect all the glass in Gaylord boxes and super sacks, so big pallet-sized cardboard boxes and such, and then they ship that down to us on regular semi-trucks. That seems to be what worked best for their community. We work, every community has their unique needs and unique circumstances, and we work hard to accommodate all of those. But this is the most common way that it's done.
Because I don't want to get too deep into it, but recycling is one of the biggest issues I've heard people comment on. And part of it was the lack of glass recycling. Part of it was, why did we not separate ourselves like other communities and have 3 containers that are picked up, because I think other communities it's paper, plastic, and glass, I think, are the divisions. and everybody has their own container that's picked up at their house. And so I've heard that as part of the dialogue in our community. But we're making inroads for this.
All the comment, the feedback that I've gotten from the public and even from ITD and different entities has really been positive. Once we get this off and running and implemented, it may be very possible that we could implement a commercial glass program. After seeing the feedback and the excitement that we got from some of the local establishments, I think that's something that we could definitely consider. It would probably be something we'd want to include in our rate study that we've got coming up over the next year, but that's something that we could definitely explore as well.
I think it makes sense because there's a lot of businesses that go through a lot of glass, and it would probably be almost as leveraging the market, so to speak, if we had facilities for them to use or a container for them to use and picked it up.
That is one of my commonly asked questions when I'm out and about. When are we going to get glass recycling? And so, I used to have to tell people, well, I'm sorry, we can't find anyone locally that will take it. Now, I kind of don't have that excuse.
You're going to have another excuse now.
So I'm going to have to come up with something else. But and I think that's what's so exciting is that at least on those service requests, we get at least 5 or 6 or 7 a year going, why don't we do glass recycling? Why can't you keep that out of the landfill? And so this is an opportunity for us to move forward. I think it's cool.
And I commend you all because I think this is fabulous. And like Roger said, one of the things I hear from people about the most is recycling. And a lot of that recently has been negative comments, being very upset about losing a lot of the plastic recycling. So I think adding glass will go a long way to making people happy about some of what they've lost, and that we are committed to trying to recycle as much as possible. I did want to just address one of the things that Roger brought up too, the idea of having people sort themselves. Having lived in communities where they do it that way, one of the downsides to that is, people tend to be lazy and they don't often want to do that, so it sometimes discourages them from recycling. They think, if I have to go to all that extra trouble, I'm just not going to bother. So, there's benefits to it, but there's also a downside to it as well. You want to make it as easy as possible and encourage people to recycle. And so along those lines, I was wondering, and don't get me wrong, because I think this sounds wonderful, but would we ever get to a point where glass would be included in our recycling bins at home, that it would get mixed in with everything else just to make it as easy as possible and then get sorted, or is that too complicated?
It would have to be separated because it chips off and damages the rest of your product. So you could have a separate recycling collection, if it moves forward and we can generate that kind of glass.
Because I think people want this, and a lot of people would go to the sites, but there are some people who are just going to say, if I have to make that extra trip, I'm not going to do it. So I'm just trying to think of ways to make it as easy and user-friendly as possible, but maybe at some point we would have a separate bin at our houses.
And that's why we're looking at putting it by grocery stores, because everyone goes to the grocery store. Well, some people don't, but most people go to the grocery store. And so that would make it, you just carry your bottles there and stuff. It is a change in recycling, because I've always encouraged people, because we didn't have glass recycling, to buy plastic. Now I've got to turn around and go buy glass.
Re-educate.
And then re-educate, yes.
Well, part of the problem with having everything separated out like that is you're looking at, that many more trucks, that many more containers, that many more drivers. I mean, you split your recycling in half, and you just doubled the amount of resources that you have to have in order to collect that.
Okay. If I could speak to that topic for a minute, operating in a number of locations around this region, Glass is, I think what everyone's learned is glass is the one thing that doesn't really belong with the others in the mixed recycling or single stream recycling as it's called. It does damage and degrade the value of the other commodities in there. If you sort out your plain white office paper, for example, which is quite valuable, and you go to market that as a commodity, which is how it's sold from the sorting centers, the broker that you're negotiating with, the first question he's going to ask is, do you accept glass in your facility? And if the answer is yes, you usually lost 25% of your sales price. Sometimes they won't even accept it. And if that glass goes to or if that paper then goes to the paper mill, and the paper mill thinks that there's glass particles in it, they're not going to turn it back into plain white office paper. They're going to turn it into downgraded paper products. So it really just doesn't play well with the other commodities in the single stream container. So I think that's what we're learning nationally, not just in this area, but nationally. And luckily, I think, at least I can speak to Salt Lake, we were a little late to the game in getting into the single stream world. So some of these lessons had already been learned in other parts of the nation. So when the sorting facilities set up shop in the Salt Lake City area, from day one, they said no glass. We will not accept loads. You can put everything else together. You can put cardboard, paper, plastic, metal. You can put all that stuff together in the bin, but we will not take anything that has glass mixed in. So even if you wanted to go in that direction where glass everything went in, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a sorting facility in the entire West, that's other than the West Coast, that would accept that material. So it may not even be an option.
That's good to know. That kind of answers that question. Yes.
Well, when we talk about education, our disposal fees are pretty cheap here. And we don't, I've known places where if you don't sort, you get fined or they won't accept your garbage. And a lot of people are really motivated when nobody's taking their garbage away. Because it costs them so much to dispense of all these materials, and so there are, we're spoiled in a way because we have our landfill. It's very accessible, and
we're spoiled that it's not mandatory. A lot of communities it is mandatory.
So let's move this party along. Jim, you okay with this?
I am.
Dina? Roger?
Yes.
I think it's a great idea. I'm very excited.
Linda?
Love it.
Rick? I don't know why we're wasting time. Let's get it moving.
All right, the direction that we needed was, let's move forward. Let's keep the truck rather than trade it in. Let's start getting the dumpsters built and distributed, and find the rest of our sites and start negotiating a contract with Momentum.
One other thing, get the patent on.
Yeah,
The patent on that, yeah.
Thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Super. Thank you. Appreciate that. What's that? That's a great story for Logan. There's no doubt about it. That's a great story for PIO. So why don't you work with him a little bit too? Good idea, Rick. Okay, we'll move to agenda item number 6, fiscal year 2017 comprehensive annual fiscal financial report and popular report update. Finance Department staff will be present to complete the fiscal year 2017 comprehensive annual financial report and popular report to
Joyce,
the
did
City
you notice
Council.
how everybody left when you came up?
I know. I thought they'd stay.
Denise
This is
is
so
here. She's very
exciting.
good.
This is exciting stuff.
And it'll be short and sweet.
that's a promise, right? That's a promise.
Yes, I will keep that promise. And someone's joining me really quickly here. It's a busy time of the year in the finance department. So Joyce Stroshine, Chief Financial Officer, and with me I have Ashley Walsh, Senior Accountant. And today we're presenting to you the completed audited financial report for the city for the fiscal year 2017. This is a technical report, I will say that. And so I have kind of marked this, tabbed it for you so that you know where the sections are. And I'm just going to give you kind of a brief description of what the sections are. So if you're looking through it, you know what you're looking at. The purple section, which begins the actual report, is the letter of transmittal that comes from the finance office to the mayor, the council members, and citizens of Pocatello. And basically within this section, we talk about the profile of the city, local economy information, long-term financial planning, relevant financial policies, major initiatives, and of course at the very end of it, on page 7, Go to that, awards and acknowledgements. So every year we submit our report to the Government Finance Officers Association for the review for the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. We have received this award for the last 13 years, which means our peers, other accountants, are reviewing this report to say, are we in compliance with Governmental Accounting Standards Board rules and regulations, and to always obtain guidance because they love passing new rules and regulations. Can I say that? Which keeps us really busy. But anyway, so that's an important thing. Why is it important? Because who cares about this report the most from a technical side is your bonding agencies. So when you go out to bond, because our report is to that level of expertise, it helps us with our interest rates, how easily it is for us to obtain bonding. They review our report, they can see the consistency of our report, and so that facilitates that.
Wouldn't we count as being very interested in how we're rated too? Wouldn't we count as being very interested in the quality of these reports?
Well,
since we're the fiduciary officers of the corporation?
Well, I hope you are, but I take it with a grain of salt that is it a complex report? Yes. And it has a lot of accounting information. And that can make it complex enough that not everybody wants to look at it.
Hence everybody leaving when she came to the table.
But yes, I think it's a most interesting story. The financial report is a story to me. It tells us what we did last year. The next important tab that I have for you is the yellow tab. That is where your independent auditor's report is. The important thing on this one is that it's an unmodified opinion, which means that, how do I want to put this? It's the highest level of, we didn't have any issues within our financial statements. Unmodified means they saw no issues within the financial statements. And meeting, in all material respects, it presents fairly the respective financial position of the governmental activities, business type activities, and the aggregate discretely presented component units of each major fund. So that's an important statement. Once again, your creditors, your granting agencies all look to that, okay?
Joyce, what do we pay for that?
Pardon?
What do we pay for that audit?
For the audit? Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because next week I'm going to really tell you what it's going to cost for the following year. It's $34,000 for this past, or the current fiscal year. We go out for a 5-year proposal, and our audit company is Deaton & Company. Usually, when you have an auditor that knows your system and works with you, the first year, if you're going to a whole new audit or auditor, there's usually shall we say, a learning curve. They have to learn us. And so it can be a little more costly in the first year. But Deaton & Company has been with us since, okay, I've got to think back. I think probably 2003. They are basically one of a couple that still do local government audits because of the requirements for them as auditors. It can be a little costly. Used to be a lot of the firms did local audits. In fact, my first years in working as a CPA was with a local firm. A lot of these are no longer doing that because of the costs related to it. So Deaton & Company knows us very well, and that facilitates it. Next year, our price tag will go up by $975, which is pretty minuscule when you think of in terms of additional cost. Okay, so unmodified opinion. The next section is the green section, green tab, pages 14 through 28. This is our management's discussion and analysis. Otherwise, I refer to it as the MDA. And so you'll see a lot of charts in there. You'll see a lot of information, trying to tear apart this information and put it into a little bit of a more concise form for you to go through. And so I'll leave that for you to note. The one big thing I would point out in this section is the net change in net position for the city as a whole went up by $14,296,164, which is a good sign. Governmental activities represented about $5.7 million, and business activities, $8.5 million of that increase. Then the next section, the orange section, orange tab, begins our actual basic financial statements. The two front statements is the statement of net position and the statement of activities. Those two statements represent all city departments except for your fiduciary departments. You have two funds that are fiduciary. It represents all the other ones, and it is on a full accrual basis. Now, I've made notes on the handout that I gave you, so you're kind of following along with me. You'll see little things like assets you can't convert, pension assets, and liabilities you can't pay off, which is your pension liability. These are numbers that are generated because of our Percy retirement program. There was a rule that was passed a few years back that says we have to report our share of that, either that pension asset or pension liability. These are based on actuary numbers, and so they are not what I'd call concrete solid gold numbers, that us accountants tend to like to look at. It's the purpose of the rule, and the reason why we report on that now is so that you have an idea whether is your agency and is the state funding appropriately their retirement programs. And I can say this, if you go into the notes, you'll see a lot of information on this. Yes, Idaho's public retirement program is a healthy program. I know that I've gone to conferences where they talk about entities that are only funded to the tune of about 30%. Those entities are in trouble, but we are not that case in Idaho. So just understand, these numbers represent something, but they're not something that if you had an extra $15 million sitting around, if you wanted to pay off that pension liability, you couldn't. So it's not what we'd call a bill that's being ready to be paid out. It's through time that you're paying towards that. And the same with the deferred outflows and inflows. That's all came about really from the GASB statements, okay? Let's see, development authorities also reported because they are a discrete component unit for the city of Pocatello, and so they're off to the side on these statements. We do prepare financial statements for the PDA all by itself, but we do in this one area report on it in a little bit in the notes. Then the remaining statements in this section are the governmental fund statements, because governmental funds are reported on a modified accrual basis, so you'll see this conversion that we do to get them to full accrual. Then you also have your budget to actual statements, your proprietary statements, which are on full accrual. Those are your business type activities. And your fiduciary statements are reported in this section. Then we can go to the white tab, which is notes to the financial statement. That goes from pages 50 to 92. There's a lot of good information in this section if you're ever interested and you want some light reading.
Is this what you do at night?
You have to love accounting when you get into this kind of stuff. This section will tell you how we treat things. So it will give you some basis of our accounting rules. It will tell you where we're at with our debt. It will tell you some history in there. It will also tell you debt, capital assets, your receivables, some of the other important information within that, commitments that you may have. So this is a good section. I will have you go to page 92 though. Right? This was a new rule. Remember how I told you how they like to create new rules for us? But I like this one. This one is on tax abatement. Okay? So when the county grants a tax abatement, we now have to report on it here as to what impact it has on our financials. Okay? And tax abatements are 5 years. And so you can see here we have Western States, that's the top one. Started in 2018 and will go through 2022. It's abated to the tune of 75%. That's 714,000 because this is in thousands. It represents the abatement. So after the 5th year, this will get reported in your new construction and come onto your books. So it's important to understand that because these are things that will impact us down the road. And you'll know Great Western Malting, the construction wasn't complete so in this reporting cycle, so it will show up next year. But I knew people were aware of it, so I wanted them to know that it's coming.
So that 5-year will start ticking next year?
Yes. The minute the exemption kicks in, and they have to have the certificate of occupancy on board before it, do you see what I mean? Before it becomes taxed. And then once it becomes taxed, then it gets the exemption, and then it travels for 5 years. Okay. Anyway, that was an important section. The next section is your required supplementary information, which is right next to it. It's pages 93 through 96. This is more information reporting on your police retirement and on your PERSI retirement programs, both for what I call general PERSI, and then you have FRF PERSI, which is the firefighters fund. Okay. And then we go to the red tab, where we begin our other financial statements. This section begins where we collapse all the non-majors, and then you will go through and you will see every section. So all your special revenue funds, your debt service funds, your capital project funds, your internal service funds, everything gets reported in here. And then on the business type activities, your budget to actuals. Those are additional supplementary information that we provide. You have to have all those to get to the end result. Shall we say, this is kind of like you work backwards. You start with some funds and you work your way to get to that statement of net position and statement of activities. The next section, which would be the blue tab, is the statistical section. And you'll see over to the side where it has kind of like a table of contents. It tells you what kind of trends we track, and you can look through that. This is good information. It gives you snapshots of, for instance, on page 182, legal debt margin information. And we're well within that for our city, but it's something we have to calculate and validate by state law. Okay? Then the final section is our schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So this is what we call our single audit section. It tells you that last year federal expenditures totaled $6,339,066. The various agencies who supplied us with dollars. Our grants are on a reimbursement basis, so it means we expend and we receive. And this is the amount of money we expended.
What are subrecipients?
Subrecipients, well, you're into CDBG programs. So, okay, NeighborWorks is a subrecipient. I'm trying to think if, I don't have.
So we give them part of our grant money and we make sure that they're spending it according to the grant rules.
Right.
We're supposed to report that now.
So we don't have many like that. CDBG is the only one that we have. And then, of course, we have to have notes to our CFA, or our schedule of expenditures for federal awards. We love acronyms in the county. And then we also have our passenger facility charge. If you all remember that is the money that we receive at the airport. It is used for our match for our FAA grant out there, grants that we receive in. And then the final letters from the auditor. And the most important page, I think, 199, schedule of findings and question costs. None. That's my favorite page. That means everything went well with our audit, and which makes us happy. This is a long process. We begin this, Ashley begins this with our inventory count, usually on 9/30 or 10/1, and that begins our audit. And it takes us usually through March to complete the whole process. It is a complicated process, so I will say that, and I appreciate my staff because they do a great job. Then what you have, okay, that's the technical report. Then we have the fund report. Oh,
Can I ask you a question on page 93?
93? I think you're in required supplementary, so
Column 3, accrued liability, 2008 group mortality table. What is that?
yes. Okay. So basically what this says, okay, I have to think, my mind's a little.
Are you forecasting the
says-
death of police officers?
No, you're
Okay.
thinking of our whole group. Way back when, we have a group of police officers, and I'm talking, I think it was in the 60s. They went to court in the 80s, and because they were promised a retirement program, this would have been prior to Percy. And so this group was granted, we were told to provide for this, the funding for this. And we levied for this up through, I want to say about 2008, okay? And at that time, we believed we had enough money put aside for police retirement. So when you look at that fiduciary statement, the one that has around $6 million in it, that's this group, okay? Well, they had $5,767,000, that's what we're saying. So we have, at this point, no active employees in this group. There are 19 retirees with 9 spouses, okay? And if a retiree passes away, the spouse can come on at a reduced rate. And so we're one of 2 cities in the state of Idaho that has this.
So it appears there's about $750,000 overfunding in that account.
Yeah, but that's, okay, remember what you're dealing with here. There's a lot of variables that I have no control over. We know how much money we have. I have a great spreadsheet that tells me how much we should need based on mortality tables, okay? And so you're trying to predict what you're going to need to meet this requirement. So right now, it's looking healthy, okay? We have to kind of wait for some of the variables to play out for us, shall
So
we say.
when all of those persons are no longer in this fund, what happens if there's excess funds?
If there's excess funds, it will revert to the general fund.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's one of those that we're monitoring. It's one of those that I'm also looking to try to have an asset manager, because we have a lot of, we have Federal Home Loan Bank bonds, we have Fannie Mae bonds, these are the investments that we put our money into. And it's getting a little more complicated at this point because of how small the group is getting to. And I'm always monitoring it to make sure we don't need to feed it more dollars. Right now, I'm saying we're healthy. But it also depends on your interest rates and what you have it invested in, okay? So it will be one of those nice things that it'll be a task that we'll be happy to not have. And I'm not saying it any other way than that, but it's just different. It's a different beast that we kind of.
It's one of those legacy things that we have, and it is what it is.
It is. And like I said, we used to have an actuary study completed on it, but we stopped doing that because the pool was so small, it was easier for us to monitor and maintain. And they discontinued that. It's been a number of years, at least 10. So, any other questions on the big report? Okay. The other report that we do, and we submit this for certification, is our Citizens Financial Report. And I gave you 2 copies because I accidentally didn't hit ledger, so you got a pocket-sized version and a full-size version. Ashley thought it was funny because I called it pocket-sized. But it's taking what's in the financial statements, kind of condensing it and putting it to an easy Reader's Digest version of the main highlights.
This is the dumbed-down version?
didn't say that.
Simplified.
Well, this is the pocket version. And this is the full-size version. But it gives you at a snapshot some of the key points within the financial statements, okay? This one tends to focus on the statement of net position, statement of activities, which is your full accrual statements. So I will say that. When they came out with GASB 34, this was back in 2003, we used to have just modified accrual statements, and the business activities were on a full accrual. And we didn't have any statement that collapsed everybody together. They thought it was really important that we have one statement. So we still have to keep the modified, and we still have to do the full accrual, and then we have to make them all come together. That's the complexity of the reporting. So, any questions on that? I'm not going to go through the detail. This is easy to read, so I'm going to let you guys read through it.
Lots of pictures.
Yeah, and we did this report when we submit it, and we've received this award for the last 12 years from GFOA. Their big thing is they like charts, they like graphs, little condensed versions of the statements so that you can get a snapshot viewpoint versus having to look at the big statements over here in the big report. But so to complete what I call my reporting time period process, I always tell you about my fan club that wants my report, the big one, right away. That's usually in March. So they've received the report, and basically it's the bonding agencies. Those are the ones that are asking me to get that information right away because they have to report to the ANIMUS system because of our bonds for municipal securities. And so they've completed that reporting process. My next step that I'm working on, in fact, I just received the email from our auditor. That's with the clearinghouse. So we have to, that schedule of federal assistance, we have to get it out to the clearinghouse so that any granting agencies will look there. That's why that schedule of findings is really important because they look to see how well you've managed your grants, okay? It can have impact if you have findings on your ability to obtain future grants. So we love a no findings, okay? Then I've been out to the central registry reporting today, updating our information, which is due by December 1st, but we like to have it, now that I have the audit done, I can update that information for 2018. And so that's usually my final reporting step, those last two things that I just talked about. So we're in the process of completing that. Once that's completed, I consider 2017 to be over. And it's good because we're in 18 and working on 19, right?
That's right.
So any questions?
I am amazed at what you do. That's pretty amazing.
You gonna read all that, Jim?
I'm going to.
Well, and we appreciate Jim sits on our audit committee, so the auditor met with us last week to provide final words on the audit process, and we appreciated that.
Good.
Good process. Good process.
Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Then, Ruth, do we adjourn this meeting to go back into?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and consider this meeting adjourned.